So obviously the title of the talk today is 11 Tips and Tricks to Become a Better Developer. And I put the word mobile when I first started this kind of in parentheses because sometimes when I've given this talk, some people they weren't necessarily into mobile. And I wanted to be able to kind of, hit something that hit both the traditional developer as well as the mobile developer, even though there is mobile developer themes here. My name is Michael Crump. I work at Telerik. I'm a part of the developer relations team. I work primarily as a developer advocate, so I'm out going all about talking to different developers and educating them on things that we've been building, products that we are interested in, and just kind of general developer knowledge. This talk is primarily about your soft skills and about what you can do to kind of become a better developer that's more kind of the unconventional way. But I'm going to get into that in just a second. Obviously, you can catch me on Twitter at mbcrump, and I'll also have a blog at michaelcrump.net, which we'll be talking about very, very shortly. So after taking kind of a look at this abstract, and a lot of people look at this and they may come back and they say, oh, well, exactly, when I take a look at this, I'm not exactly sure. So we have a couple of different things like, you see words like goals, you see words like 11 items, skills and effectiveness. And all of those is basically to say, this is kind of my kind of roadmap that I kind of started planning when I first started building a talk. So this leads us into, what this talk is not really about. We always hear a lot about, learning the basics first as you're starting to become a developer, and, take advantage of these code analysis tools to, commenting and reading other developer code, mobile testing. And it's also not about bullet points. This is going to be more along the line of just real world experience. So this is kind of a list of some of the unconventional ways that I've discovered personally to become a mobile developer. So breaking loose from the pack and not actually following some of the traditional guidelines that most people have been doing. So let me adjust my screen here. And all right, we're back in. Okay, so the very first one that I'm going to start about, and don't worry about taking a list of all this. The slides are going to be available as well as a full outline list at the end that you can check out and download. The first one that I want to talk about is blogging. And by the way, this is a very interactive, kind of laid-back type of session. This is actually one of my favorite talks to give because it's just talking with different types of people. So how many people out there actually have some sort of blog that they maintain? So I'm seeing a couple of hands in the front. I'm seeing one there, but I'm not seeing that many other people. And that's okay. But I'm going to kind of tell you the reason why you should start a blog. And there's a lot of options when it kind of gets into why you should start building a blog and putting it together. So the very first one of the reasons that I found is that you'll start to become this better thinker than you were before. So the process of writing in and of itself, it's there's a lot of things where you're recording your thoughts, on a day-to-day basis, and this blogging process, it really keeps encouraging you to stop and think a little bit deeper about what you're writing. Whenever you're starting to write a blog post and you publish your first post, people traditionally publish something like "Hello World." One of the things that they don't necessarily think about is that, okay, at the beginning you're not going to get a lot of views, but later on in the process you will have more people reading your stuff. And when you start publishing for sites like Telerik Developer Network, which is just developer.telerik.com, you'll start seeing that the quality of articles has to go up, and that people will find all kinds of things that they can criticize you for. But the thinking part is where I believe that it really starts to kick in with blogging. Another one, and I have to let Napoleon Dynamite help me out here, and it's really all about showing your skills. So we all have a vast variety of skills. Every single person in this room could teach me something new right now. And everybody has a vast variety of skill sets. What I've found is that technical recruiters, even coworkers, bosses, and pretty much everybody, kind of has an eye on what you write, and regardless whether you know it or not, they're talking about it. And I look at like my blog as something that people go to, they visit, they find the content that they want. I decided to go ad-free, where there was absolutely no ads. Obviously, you can monetize that if you would like. Some people do, some people don't. But that blogging will start showcasing that skill set. And I know many people that have started blogging, and they would write maybe, some C# or some Java, or they would write in other different languages. And the next thing you know, they're getting recruited. One of the recent, examples of this was somebody that started going through the Apple WWDC 14 sessions, and they started documenting all of the sessions and what they found that was really cool, and they just put it like in a GitHub gist. And the next thing you know, they were actually contacted by Apple, and Apple was asking them if they wanted a job. This was something that was pretty big, that was on Hacker News. So just one thing just to keep in mind here is that this is obviously going to be a continual thing of showing your skills. The other thing that I found is being able to meet brand new people. So as I've been in this journey, and I've been doing this now for about 8 years or so, I've been blogging, I've met people that have been, that have read my blog and that have come up to me and have been like, hey, Michael, I read this post helped me a lot, I appreciate that. But there was also a deeper conversation. So I would have a conversation maybe with somebody, and I remember in the early days writing about MVVM Lite and some of the other topics, and people would come back and they would say, oh, okay, so actually you wrote it like this, but you could have wrote it this a little bit better if you had have done it this way. And I really appreciated that feedback. So not only were you, engaging and meeting new people, but you were able to kind of start that conversation. The next thing that I feel that blogging does for us, and is is something that we want to pay special attention to, is that this is kind of leaving our footprint, on the internet for other people that study in our craft. So after we're all long and gone, and we've heard this over and over, people, you only have a certain amount of keystrokes left in you, and then after that amount of keystrokes ends, well, you're gone. But your stuff that you created a long time ago is still alive in it as well. So we kind of all know what kind of happens with this stuff. Whenever you post anything on the internet, it's going to live there forever. And the greatest example of this is what had happened to Beyonce. She didn't like this photo right here, and needless to say, I decided not to put a big blown up version of it. She didn't want this photo, and I just went back and I just did another search. And so many people have already started, making all kinds of just different pictures of her, and they started threatening to take down websites and stuff. So your content lives on forever. And another example that I have of that is a blog that I don't maintain, a blog that I haven't worked with a long time ago, and this was actually something that was back from 2010. So in 2010, I had this guy, he sent me this email, and he said, in short, hey Michael, I've been doing this WinForms work or whatever. I could really appreciate some, help here, getting up to speed. And he said, hey, here's a link to where I found your site, because I had interacted with this guy back and forth a couple of times, and I was trying to figure out, where did he know that I was doing this stuff from? And when I looked back at the URL, you can see this was from 2010. And this is from the new Google Inbox screen capture. This was an email that I recently received. So here we are in 2015, and people still reading content from a site that was built and published and using some crappy editor from crappy blog engine from way back when. But more importantly, I believe that when you start with blogging, you begin with being able to start marketing yourself as a professional. In this, we obviously have this guy, that's showing a business card with absolutely nothing on it. And this is something that, if you're not doing a couple of different things, I believe that you kind of are that unknown type of person that, it's just you're just another developer, or you're just another mobile developer. But especially with start blogging, you're able to start pulling in more of those people. And it's marketing yourself as a professional. Moving along, I'm finding more and more that this is serving me as an actual personal journal. So we've talked about all of the different things that you can do with it, but we also haven't touched on, the actual journal aspect of it. So with the journal aspect of it, here is just a tweet that I remember writing back. It says, hey, I can't tell, the number of times, I've read my own blog post. And this is something that, I had wrote a blog post on Git, and I couldn't remember how to use it. This was back in Visual Studio. I never remember how to use it, so I kept writing this in another post of this, and I was able to go back and use that as a journal. I really think that it also helps you learn things very, very quickly. So we're pushed, every single one of us that's in this room, we're constantly being pushed towards learning something new and getting deeply, involved in the next great, biggest thing that's happening. Having that blog gives you that ability that you go back and you say, oh wow, here's some new technology that's about to come out, and I've obviously been playing with Swift and wearables and things of that nature and IoT. It kind of helped me push me over the edge and start blogging a little bit more. So I would encourage, I saw, we had a handful, of people that was blogging. If you're looking at getting started blogging, one of the engines that I've been looking at, and Brian Rinaldi, who's in the front, has a talk on it. It's about static web engines, static sites, and so it's called Jekyll. And there's a great website that's just called Jekyll Now. So how many people actually has a GitHub account? Good. So if you have a GitHub account, you have Amazon's fastest servers, and you're going to be able to use, there's a website called Jekyll Now, and you can go to Jekyll Now and you can actually fork that repo, and you can pull in everything that's required to use Jekyll. And you just have like whatever your username is, .github.io. So there's no charges there, and you don't have to go to any of these other providers that want to place ads and things like that. It's all going to be hosted on Amazon servers for free. All right, moving into the next topic here is going to be Twitter. So this one's kind of strange when people first see the big blue bird, pop up on the screen. And about how I use Twitter. I use Twitter slightly different than what most people do it for. So my question here is, what do you actually use, Twitter for? Is it mainly, just these, crazy rants? Obviously, you don't want to get involved in politics, religion, and some of these other things that make people angry and mad, or Twitter wars. And I've noticed that overall, when I did some searches on Twitter, it kept moving back to, it was all about sharing knowledge with friends. And I just did some searches for Atlanta, and this one popped up, and I thought it was kind of funny because here it was some guy, and I actually removed the username where you wouldn't beat them up too bad. But yeah, it said sharing knowledge with friends, and it says Atlanta spelled backwards is Atlanta. And so I actually stopped for a minute. I was like, what, really? Are you serious? So that's just one example. I've seen, if you're going to share the knowledge with friends, you're obviously going to want to make sure that it is solid knowledge and not just some crazy random thing like this. But using Twitter as a tool is something that I don't think that a lot of developers and mobile developers tend to think of as something that they would use on their Mac or their PC all the time. Just wondering, how many people actually even has a Twitter account in the room? This is a lot more. I'm seeing more and more people having Twitter accounts, and that's an absolutely great thing. But how many people actually see it as a tool? 1, 2, 3. So, all right, here's a couple of things that I've been using Twitter as a tool. So we have a couple of main IDEs, speaking in the native mobile development space. Xcode, we have Xcode developers here, I'm sure, and Android Studio, or probably a lot of people are more familiar with Eclipse, especially in the Java space, but if you've been building for Android devices, you've kind of switched over and started migrating that path over to Android Studio, and then good old Visual Studio. Any Visual Studio users in here? Few, yeah, more than I expected. I was expecting more people to be along the lines of Java. So these are a couple of tools that we already have in our toolbox, and I've added this fourth tool, which is Twitter, that I keep open every single day. The reason that I use Twitter and I keep it docked to one side of my screen is that I am absolutely obsessed with just using the hashtag portion of this. The reason for that is that obviously we all kind of know what hashtags are, and if you don't, basically you can just use a hashtag and put in a name, and anything that appears with that that somebody's tweeted, you know, like #Devnexus, it'll show up in the results. I'm assuming most people know what that is. But one of the things I've been using it for is news, and I'm sorry about the resolution here, but I know you probably can't read that, but here is where I actually just did a search for iOS Dev. So iOS Dev is one of the few that I keep up with constantly, as well as Telerik, and I've been doing it here at Devnexus. And I've noticed that, you know, staying up to date with, you know, what's happening, you know, in software development is absolutely, you know, crucial. You know, so like you have questions like, you know, which company, you know, was just bought out? What product just shipped? And, you know, I remember, you know, when we've started seeing, you know, the Apple Watch announcements, I had that on the background, and I really felt that, you know, I didn't really need to watch the live stream because people were tweeting about it like crazy. So that's one area that you can use, that's one reason that you can use that for, but also what is happening absolutely right now in this moment in software development. So if you want to know you know, from the latest tweets from the latest companies, I found this is to be very, very effective. The other item that I have here is, you know, if you have a question, we are actually listening all the time. Here's a question that, you know, popped up on Stack Overflow. Again, this is still using iOS Dev, and it was on Stack Exchange, and it was an iOS question. And so I found that when Swift first came out, obviously Swift has evolved. You know, there's a 1.2 beta that's out now, but when Swift first came out, there was a lot of problems. There was a lot of bugs. There was a lot of issues that I experienced with Swift. And I found a big majority of the solutions just simply by doing a search on the hashtag. And here's a question that I hit, and I went to it. And obviously, you know, there's other reasons for that, but I was able to go into some of these questions and see what the answer was. Other reasons is finding jobs. So this is something that a lot of people don't necessarily think about. So last week, there was a big Angular conference that was in Salt Lake City. And so Angular, you know, obviously has a lot of buzz and everything around it. But I was looking through my stream and I found one of my friends named Shay. he tweeted, hey, following the AngularJS hashtag, is quite amazing. There's all kinds of, recruiting tweets. We're seeing a shortage of Angular developers out there. So I started doing some searches. And, sure enough, I started seeing some jobs. So some of the jobs that I've listed right here, these were just a couple of jobs, senior front-end developer. Here's another one, remote jobs. Remote jobs is something that I would encourage you to always check out. There's always great jobs if you're like me and you can't stand a cubicle. But there was plenty of jobs that was out there. And this is obviously isn't just for Angular, it's for whatever that you're working on, whatever technology that you're the most interested in with working. So other jobs that I found was obviously, iOS. Here's just a quick example of an iOS developer. iOS developer, needed to architect apps for startups. And I've seen tons of these, and these range from different places, from like, Palo Alto, San Francisco, all of those areas that people are still looking for people to come in. We'll find out as we move into this presentation that there's quite a few others. But what about promoting apps? Promoting apps is something that most people tend, especially in the developer space, they tend to think of promoting apps, well, I've got to pay Twitter. And when you start looking at how much you've got to pay Twitter to start promoting, and I don't know if you've ever done a promoted tweet. I have, I've worked with our company and stuff to do a promoted tweet, but it can kind of get pricey over time. You don't really have to use those promoted tweets if you pull in and start using Twitter cards. So Twitter cards is, obviously is one way, and here's kind of an example here of where somebody showed this app called Telegram Messenger. It came with a QR code, which I'm like, okay, where they were trying to save, the 140 keystrokes, but I was actually just looking through the stream, and I found this, and I decided, hey, you know what? I'll give this a shot. And there was other apps that I found that was very cool, and I got to meet some of the creators of those applications at different conferences. One of the ones that I found was a flight application, and the flight application tracked. And so I found them through Twitter. I contacted the guy, and the next thing you know, he was giving me promo codes, to unlock in-app purchases and things like that. So there was a couple of bonuses there. So how many here is very interested in open source software? Yeah, that's exactly what I expected. Open source software, where do you typically go to find open source software? I can tell you what I do. A lot of the times, I may jump on GitHub, and I may start searching the different types of repos that are already out there, and I will look through the repos, but sometimes I can't necessarily find what I want. So if I'm looking, for something in particular, I'll search through it, I'll find a bunch of crap, and then I'll find maybe something that I can use pieces of. But there's other ways that you can search and find these. Just simple Google searches sometimes can pull up the open source that you want. But I found an exceptionally large number of quality open source software stuff just simply by Twitter. And here's another example of just a project that somebody had built. But I also found some of the projects that Flipboard had built for iOS developers, where they could start inspecting more of their application and finding some of the underlying stuff in order to get them up and going. So I think Twitter is obviously another very great way that you can go ahead and jump in and get used to start using open source software. Other reasons here is learning. So here is just a video. I found that the learning process kind of ranges from the videos to just the blog post to some of the other things, but the videos, and primarily I've seen them being free. I mean, I create videos myself kind of on the side, and I publish those, and you kind of this kind of starts going back to becoming that better developer, because you're getting the news, that latest video from somebody, when Apple Watch came out, I started seeing more and more, or the SDK came out, I started seeing more and more people that were started releasing videos of it. I did a video on some of the latest stuff that was happening with IE11, and I know we all love IE11 in here, right? Yeah, best browser ever. So yeah. So anyway, don't go to my channel to see that, so just forget that. But anyway, I found it as a great source for learning. But I saved kind of the best for last, and it was staying connected. So I come to Atlanta, quite a bit, and so when I was in Atlanta, I went to an AT&T hackathon. And has anybody been to any of the AT&T hackathons that's kind of in this area, in and around this area? Yeah, so you won, one person, great. So and he can definitely back me up on this. One of the things that I found about the hackathons was that they were great in order to form teams, but once the project was over, the teams kind of separated out. And so what I found here was this was a tweet, this was a tweet from somebody, and was like, hey, thanks for the help. Well, that wasn't where this actually ended at with the conversation. We kept going from there. It was, okay, here's what's happened. Thanks for giving me your Twitter account. I was able to keep in touch with you, and I've already exchanged Twitter with many people here. But here's my problem. The team that I had, when my first question was, where's your team at? Where did everybody go? It was, well, they kind of all separated. Most of the time, if they didn't win or whatever, these projects would just completely die. And so this was an app, it was a medical app called Ready Responder. I won't go into the details of it, but it was a great way to stay connected. And while you're here for the next 2 days, I would encourage you to find as many people as absolutely possible to exchange Twitter with and keep in touch with them. And people that I've met years ago, I still have conversations with today, and I may not know them, but I'm still able to talk to them, and I'm still able to have that deep conversation. The next one is kind of a tough one, especially for me, and it's all about getting out of your comfort zone. This was a very important step for me to start becoming a better developer in general. So we can kind of see, there's a couple of layers here. We have the comfort zone, which you can see in blue, and then we have the learning, and then we have the panic zone. So there's a couple of charts that I've seen where people have kind of outlined this. So the panic zone is a very scary place to be, and I'm just going to back up and kind of give you kind of this little story that that some people tend to like. So here's this tale of this guy that from Alabama, great state, love it, but the thing was that I was kind of in a dead-end job. I had worked at a children's hospital, which was great. I enjoyed that very, very much so. But the job after that, I had worked in and done primarily consulting type of work. Now, consulting work I know takes a different type of person, and I'm not going to name the company name or anything like that, but it was a completely dead-end job. It was one of those, we've all been there. We've been hired for one thing, and then once we arrive on site, oh no, we need you to do this, this, and this. And it's funny is that for me, I'm not a JavaScript developer, and when I'd landed on site, they were like, yes, this was back when Knockout was just supreme for any JavaScript developers here. So they were like, we need you to start working with Knockout. I was like, okay, I needed a little bit of ramp up time, so I was deep into ramp up time. So starting with this tale, what I did to start kind of moving away from that, and I did a lot of this during the consulting time, was I created this blog. I started creating my blog. This was kind of a variation with the old Geeks with Blog one, and I did a Twitter account, and I would pretty much speak anywhere anybody would have me. So with doing that, that obviously limited me to where I was at, but this absolutely terrified me. And this is the shining reference number 1. There will be another one coming up. So this was, one of the scariest scenes I can remember. When I felt like I was 13, watching The Shining again when I started doing some of this stuff. Because when you're very public facing, especially with blogging and with using Twitter and some of these other things, more and more eyes are on you. So you would kind of think, from here that, many months would pass by, and it's all going to be about unicorns and rainbows and maybe even some bunnies, right? So you kind of get the best of all of these things. Well, it didn't necessarily turn out that way. So when I first did this, so we're talking about tens of views on the blogs, tens of views. The same thing happened right around with Twitter. Probably about 100 people or so there. And I found that most of the time, I would get picked up at some sort of user groups and code camps and things like that. I didn't have, the luxury of coming to, very nice conferences like this and, things like that. So it was kind of disappointing when I started seeing, what this actually generated. And it just takes a long time in order for you to start maintaining that sort of, okay, this person, is an expert in this technology, or is the person, the go-to person for this topic. So with doing the user groups and code camps that I talked about, I kept pushing forward. And so, as I said here, I landed some conferences, these smaller conferences that were within my zip code. And my zip code is 35235. So you can see, my area of where I'm located at. That's a Birmingham zip code. So one of the ones that I hit was DevLink. Has anybody been to DevLink in Chattanooga, Tennessee? Nobody? Okay, that's okay. So DevLink was a conference. They actually, this was their last year was their last year doing it, but they had done it like 5 years before. Chattanooga is about like Atlanta is for me. It's about 100. Atlanta is about 133 miles. Chattanooga is somewhere in the, I don't know, hundreds or something, low hundreds. So I went to DevLink, and when I was at DevLink, I met one of the guys that was leading our developer evangelist team at that time. We switched it to evangelist to advocate, and it's kind of, Google does that, and a couple of others does that as well. So I met this guy, and this was just at a conference. I was just an attendee at a conference, and I met him and I started talking to him. And he pulled me down and he said, he pulled me, outside, at the speaker dinner and said, hey, I'd like to chat with you a little bit more, about what you've been doing and things that you've been working with. So we started chatting, and the next thing I know, I looked up and absolutely everybody from the speaker dinner had already left, and it was just us there. And that came to, me finally getting a job offer, at Telerik. And so I took the job. But the main thing here was that I absolutely had a lot to risk. And you're thinking, well, you've got a dream job, and everything like that. This was exactly what you wanted to do. You're getting out of the dead end thing, so everything's got to be great. Well, again, kind of like you saw previously, there's always going to be these bumps in the roads. There was an absolute ton of different things that were going on at the same moment. I had my mother-in-law, she was unable to take care of herself, and she actually had to move into our home at the same exact time that this was taking place. And so she was disabled, and we were also at the same time we were moving into a brand new house with a bigger mortgage payment than before. And then lastly, we had this new baby, and it was, again, it was an absolutely terrifying experience. And the benefits at my previous job were great. Working in healthcare and doing some of the other things, you obviously get a lot of different types of perks. So this kind of story kind of shows you that, where I started from to kind of where I ended up with is something that's very, for me, I'm very happy, and it's something that I think that, everybody here, they could do as well. So I was actually this guy right here, the very, the socially awkward type of guy. And believe it or not, I went to conferences. This was, back in the early day, and I was pretty much, I would watch a lot of other people, talking and things like that. And I really didn't want to be involved with that. I was pretty comfortable, kind of in my zone, doing my own type of thing. So I went from this, kind of socially awkward type of guy to asking Apple's SVP for a selfie. And there was absolutely no shame in that. It was one of those things, hey, Craig's here, can I get a picture, with you? And he was totally fine with that. Okay, so let's keep moving on. Does anybody recognize him, by the way? Just wondering. Few people, yeah. He was at the Apple Watch event on Monday. All right, moving on. Now, some of these I may go through quick, some of them I may not. So Stack Overflow. I believe everybody here has a Stack Overflow account in some manner, correct? All right, there's a couple of things that I've noticed that people have started using Stack Overflow for. One of them being, people have asked me, when discussion forums, and we know, especially those that use Stack Overflow, absolutely not. It's just this simple thing of getting answers. And you have this thing, just questions, just answers, and that's it. But a lot of people have turned it into a couple of other things, and I found that most people drop the ball with these 3 items. Questions that they haven't researched yet. This is one of the most biggest thing that I see on Stack Overflow is people they go ahead and they post a question and they've done absolutely no research. Hey, how do I concatenate strings in Swift, in C#, in Swift and Java and all these other types of languages? And these are answers that you just do a Google search and it'll be there. Other times, it was just these short, code snippets that you couldn't compile yourself, and you had to, you had to actually work out the whole thing by the whole solution, and your own IDE to help answer their question. Another one is product and service recommendations. These questions, tend to be, hey, you know what, Salesforce, should I use it or should I not? And again, we're back to, this is questions and answers and not necessarily a discussion forum. So a lot of product and service recommendations, and we have quite a few, product and service recommendations on our side as well. And then other questions was just questions that just weren't absolutely at all related to software development. So you may have a question, you post it, and people are going to just download it like crazy, and the next thing you know, the mod will get rid of it and will toss it. They should be asking more of these types of questions. Absolutely specific programming problems that they have. And I've noticed that whenever I published or ask a question, if I would, if I was whatever technology, if I'm working with, I would sometimes even include, a place for them to actually download the source code. The more specific that you can get your programming problem that you have, the more likely you are to actually get an answer. And I go to Stack Overflow every day and look at some of the questions. The other thing is that, and it may be funny to put this up here, but it's questions regarding algorithms. So those of you who went to college, maybe you graduated in CIS or EE or something like that, you may have noticed that, hey, there's these different algorithms that I used back in 1998 or whatever that I'm not using anymore. There's no fear, just go ahead and still post them. People are very interested in learning these things as well, because as I was talking this morning to some of my colleagues here about some of the questions that I had heard Google asking about, like bubble sort algorithms and things like that. These are good things. These are things that we may have forgotten in our past time. Also, software development best practices. So we have a lot of different best practices, and I have a quick session, part of this that's going to be on design patterns. And I found that the software development practices here is something that we should always not be afraid of. So whichever design pattern of your choice, again, go for it. I've also found that tags absolutely rock with Stack Overflow. Tags is how I actually monitor Telerik's side of things as well. So in this image, you can see we have a tag of like iOS. Well, I also set up tags for some of our products, even for just some generic things like charts with like iOS. And I'll show you a couple of how to set up these chains. So one thing is that the chains is something, these tags are absolutely a vital part of getting Stack Overflow and knocking it out. So setting up chains. I am one of these guys, I love just to use the web browser. A lot of the times I tweet just from web browsers and things like that. And so setting up chains for it, maybe you know this or maybe you don't, but if you just use questions tagged, and in this example I'm using mobile or iOS, you can return all the questions that match that tag. Obviously, if you leave out the or, then it's going to return all the tags with both mobile and iOS, whereas the previous one just returned the questions returning either tag. But you can kind of get a little crazy with this if you would like. You can go mobile or iOS or Android and a couple of other things, and you can chain these multiple tags together and it will display those in a nice list. But a lot of times people say, well, you know what, I don't really care about doing that sort of thing. I would like for it to be a little bit easier and maybe automated, and I'm with you there as well, because I do that for our stuff. And if you pick out, here's an example. You can see, there's a lot of love here for iOS and charts. When we were first building our chart for our UI for iOS suite, I would set up these tags, and then I would hit on this subscribe button. And the subscribe button would allow you to pull this data out, and you could send it into an email if you would like. And then obviously on the other side of things, if you still use RSS, does people still use RSS feeds? Brian does. All the time. So anybody else using RSS? Okay, so I see, yeah. So I saw 4 people total here that's actually using RSS. All right, so don't worry, I'm going to talk about that in just shortly as well. So RSS button you can obviously hit as well. But also, again, we're kind of going back into the careers page. So I talked about Twitter being the careers thing, but Stack Overflow has this page, and most people here they're familiar with Stack Overflow's jobs and their career page. You punch in your keyboard, you give it a location, the next thing you know, you hit search and it's there. One of the things that Stack Overflow has recently added that I've been taking a look at as well is this thing where you can start exploring cities. So this is currently in the beta form, and you can see here's a couple of cities here, and I'm assuming that most people here is probably from the area or close to the area or something like that in the Atlanta area. And I found Atlanta. It was listed in the major cities, and there was only a handful. Unfortunately, they didn't have mine, but I'm kind of used to that at this point. So Atlanta was here, but a couple of things that I found that was interesting was that whatever you're into, like system administrator, web application developer, or web product manager, it would start to give you, some sort of sum of how much is to kind of be expected with this. And rep is another thing that a lot of people kind of get tied up in about, hey, I want tons of rep. This, for me personally, this is one of the best reasons to have a nice rep score, is that you're going to be able to show your score when you submit your application to one of these companies in Atlanta. Here's my rep, here's where I've been answering stuff. And this also will help complement, where you add in your blog and your other information. And so when you look at, what do I use this the absolutely most for? And it's a very simple graphic here and a very simple word. It's just absolutely just learning. If you look up my Stack Overflow rep, you'll see that it's fairly low. I do answer questions, but you'll see my activity as almost daily. If you are passionate about Java or different things of that nature, and you just go through and just read those questions every single day, I guarantee you, I'm just saying 10 minutes. They have like the 10-minute abs, and then they decided to start doing like the 5-minute abs, and then there's like 3-minute abs, and there's all this other stuff. If you spend 10 minutes a day just sifting through the questions on Stack Overflow, I believe you'll learn an absolutely lot. Okay, the next thing I want to kick up is keeping calm. What'd you say?
Saying I used to do that a lot, but we get out of that habit sometimes. You forget about the 10 minutes.
Yeah, so here's somebody, he's saying, hey, you know what? I used to do that a lot. It's real easy to get out of the habit. Did you find it very successful when you were doing it? Yeah, so definitely check that out and make sure you try to spend 10 minutes a day. I don't think that's too much. Here's one that I've actually had to pull up because of stuff that I've seen at places that I've worked at, and that's keeping calm to all of these changes that's happening around mobile. So we know that this was the one screen that we were using over and over and over again. It was the desktop. And so a lot of things have happened since the desktop era. And now, with mobile, we're building for a lot of different devices. Here I tried to list out most of the current iOS 6 devices, as well as the various versions of iPad that was out there. So iOS obviously is starting to expand. I remember submitting an app when they just had the one screen size. I believe the 3.5. We've moved to 4.4 and 5.7. We keep having a couple. We've had four different screen sizes there, and that started to cause confusion, especially with things called auto layout and things in Xcode. And so people started saying, oh, you know what, I'm not going to use Interface Builder to start building out my UI. I'm going to do everything in code because that's the way I can get exactly what I want. Other things was Android. I know there's a ton of Android users here because I've seen their phones out. And we've seen the fragmentation that kind of existed here. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways to address the fragmentation with the different screen sizes. They offer relative layouts if you're building in native, linear layouts, and a couple of other ways that helps your app adjust and the content adjust to various sizes of the screen. Then we have Windows Phone. I haven't seen too many people with Windows Phones in a long time. Windows Phone is something that I was trying to put a lot of effort into, but it kind of fell flat. Windows Phone has a whole slew of various resolutions here. And then we have BlackBerry, and then we find out nobody cares. So you can just go ahead and just put an X over the BlackBerry thing, because really it's done. It's funny is that I was at NDEFCON, and when I was at NDEFCON, people they had a BlackBerry guy there, and he was saying, oh, you know what, you're building for Android, we're going to be able to move your app over and we're going to make it work for BlackBerry. Nobody cared. But then we kind of spanned out to even more things. So here we've got these different types of wearables. We have the Nike Fuel, we have the Pebble Watch. The Pebble Watch is very fun. If you've done any JavaScript, they have a JavaScript SDK out for it that's awesome. And then we have some watches. This is just a Samsung watch. And just a couple of other Bluetooth devices that you can start building for. Yeah, I think there's a Google Glass on there. And that's dead as well. So when you start looking at all these different things, the first thing that pops up is, hey, this is absolutely enough to make you scream. And I will say the very first movie was pretty good. The fourth one was not so good. I would say take that step back and start looking exactly at who your customers are and seeing, what's their actual needs. So for iOS, and sadly enough, I actually had to log into my developer account to even grab this graphic. And here we can see, 75% of devices are using iOS 8. And the other devices, there's 22% that's on iOS 7. And probably the reason most people haven't migrated to 8 is either their device doesn't support it or they don't have enough space. I mean, I tweeted out just the other day when 8.2 came out, we're looking at 600 megabyte downloads, for that. And I remember people, just deleting crap just in order to get the update installed on their phone. But we really need to pay attention to that. And when we were starting to first build UI for iOS, we looked at, what can we drop down to and reach the maximum number of users? And iOS 7 was the hotspot. And with iOS 7, you can see here, we're reaching a vast variety of our audience. There's only 3% from what I can see that's using earlier versions of iOS, and we don't care about them. That's actually a small enough number you can legitimately say we're able to move on. Android, I pulled out their stats. Thankfully, their stats, you don't have to log in or anything like that. And the thing that we found when we were building our UI for iOS, again, it goes back to building what's best for the customer. We had to look and see, where's the sweet spot here. So 2.33 is gingerbread, and you'll notice if you have any sort of Kindle device, this is what this is actually using, is 2.33. You'll see that, okay, we start at API 10, and then we have a distribution of 6.9, and then the distribution starts going up. And KitKat, this is an amazing number, 40.9%. So we weren't going to build for KitKat because that's going to leave us 60% of people that can't use and can't buy our stuff. So when we started looking at this, we looked at a chart that was obviously earlier than this one. I did this one on March the 2nd. But we decided to go with 2.33. Obviously, there were some features that we couldn't add, and as time goes by, we'll drop support for 2.33, and we'll start moving up to maybe the next level. But we were able to do everything that we needed to do. Then down here at the bottom, you have Lollipop with 3.3. And I was in Las Vegas about 2 weeks ago, and I was talking on Android. And when I was there, there was several questions that popped up and said, well, I want to use Lollipop because I was showing some demos of some of the cool things that you could do. And what I kept telling people there was, okay, if you're going to do Lollipop, just keep in mind you've got 3.3% of people who's actually going to care. So there's that number. So how should I build it? Also played into a part of that. And this is a slide that I've used a couple of times, and I'm not going to kind of go over all of this, but again, it goes back to building for, what's best for your organization. What skills do you have? And I found that obviously with the native crowd, and I'm talking about native using Xcode, Android Studio, using or Eclipse or Visual Studio, if you had developers, in-house, and they only needed to target one device, and they had some of these skill sets, then you may want to just go ahead and build native. If you need that lightning fast game, something that's going to, it's going to be really, pushing the processor, then native's an absolutely great way to go. We have hybrid. Obviously, hybrid is absolutely great for the people that are web developers in general. We have a solution for that called App Builder, and with App Builder, it allows you to quickly, build apps, and you don't even have to have a Mac, because we've had some people that didn't have a Mac. You can use some of the native APIs, obviously not all of them, and the development cost is not that bad. Mobile web is basically using something like maybe even just like an ASP.NET Ajax site or something like that, just responsive design, bootstrap, things of that nature. But what I've found more interestingly is that, so in the past we've had all these ties to native, hybrid, and mobile web. And we've heard these three things over and over and over again. But one of the things that I thought was awesome was a product that we built that was called nativescript.org. And NativeScript, has anybody in here heard of NativeScript before? Oh, good. We've got more people than what I thought. Excellent. So NativeScript is awesome because it allows you to use XML for your front end, and so you could put in your buttons, your labels, and things like that. If you've ever done any XAML work, it doesn't directly translate the XML from that to XAML. You create your UI in that, and you use CSS for styling, and then obviously you use your JavaScript skills for the coding. But there's an underlying architecture that I won't get into just for time, but that will allow you, when you create and you build that application, that it is an actual native application. So this is kind of another fourth dimension type of thing to it. So I would encourage you to at least check out nativescript.org. Okay, we are I think at the halfway point here. So design patterns. Design patterns is something that I wanted to touch on because I found that design patterns is sometimes something that we didn't really learn in college, or maybe we didn't even graduate, in computer science and things like that. So, I found that there's a couple of different design patterns, and the most popular being this one, the big ball of mud. And everybody knows this one, right? You've heard of this. This is real. This is actually on Wikipedia, the big ball of mud. So I'm seeing one person say, yes, they have heard of this. So I went to Wikipedia and I looked it up. And before I show you that, this was exactly what I was doing at my previous jobs. And it says here, basically it's haphazardly structured, sprawling, sloppy, duct tape, and bawling wire spaghetti code jungle. That's the actual definition that Wikipedia gives, and it's there. I added a link to it. But that's the type of projects that we've all been given. And these are the projects, I see a couple of people laughing, these are the projects that we wanted to punch the people in the face. We get their code base and there's no structure whatsoever to it. So I say, know at least one well. And so we do have some guidance. Apple obviously is leading you towards the MVC path, which I absolutely love. I love that they push you into that direction because there's no question about it. Code behind, nope. It's not going to be like that. Whereas some of these others, and I'll talk about them in just a second, don't have that. But Apple says MVC. You can see here we've got a first view controller and a second view controller. And if you come to my Swift session is at the end of is at the very end of the conference. We're going to go into all kinds of different things on building apps with Swift, and we're also going to build an Apple Watch app as well. But Android and Windows Phone, what do they tell you? What's the direction there? I don't care. Just use whatever you want. It's just whichever platform you want. Windows Phone, MVVM is obviously one of the biggies there for its powerful use of bindings and things like that. So I looked up, and I looked up what was the most popular design patterns people are using, in case you're not using one right now. And the Singleton design pattern for Android is very popular. Factory for Android, Windows Phone, MVVM. And then I got to looking into hybrid mobile apps with JavaScript. And I did some searches on Stack Overflow, and I could not find one single design pattern that most people stick with when they were building hybrid mobile apps, even like with Cordova. So there's like this big, huge list here that I've added in. You know, the module pattern, the Singleton, just like we saw earlier, you know, and Cascade and Factory. But I said all this to say this: don't really turn into this person. This is the person that I met at one of my previous jobs, and he was hardcore. You've got to use, you know, if you're using MVVM Lite and you have, you know, just a bit of code behind, you totally suck. We're going to pull all this out. We're going to redo the application. And he was the type, you know, maybe he did live at home, you know, with his mom or whatever. But it was one of those things that you have to, you know, make a conscious effort to not turn into him. Also find a very good book. These are two books that probably everybody in the room has seen or heard of. The Design Patterns by the Gang of Four. How many people has read that one? Okay. And the other book is really strange because I don't know if she's looking up into a camera like a concert, like, you know, those people that hold cameras over concerts or whatever, but this is actually a very good book, and it's Head's First Design Pattern, regardless of the cover. Maybe marketing needed to work on that one a little bit better there. But Head's First Design Pattern is another book, and both of those books are great reads. I would probably start with the Design Patterns book and then head over to the Head's First Design Patterns. Here's another one. Be more awesome than last year. So we hear that quite a bit. We have questions about that. You know, what exactly is this meaning? You want to be awesome, more awesome than next year. And there's been other people that have done, you know, soft skills talks that have talked about that. And I noticed that they used a lot of these sorts of, you know, kind of post-it notes. You know, finding a new job, you know, losing weight, enjoying life, and, you know, taking a hike, and so forth. I've actually come up with a couple of my own here. All right. One of them was starting with an absolutely small goal. So I started with, you know, some certifications. I decided to go through the certifications. I started with like an MCP. Obviously, this is in the Microsoft world, and then I moved up to the MCTS, which was the technical specialist, and then MCPD, which is the professional developer. But I did that. But also another one that I started doing in the mobile space was I started releasing my first iOS application. My very first iOS application, I'm just too embarrassed to even bring it up on the screen here. So I built an app. This was in Objective-C. This was back when there was no Swift. It was just pure Objective-C. And, you know, I paid the 99 bucks, started building it. And it was like a kind of a more back to the personal branding type of thing. It pulled in like my RSS feed. I submitted it, and I was so happy because I had worked so hard. I even used Fiverr to get somebody to design my logos. If you heard of the Fiverr website, it's $5, so you can kind of tell the quality there. So I submitted it, booyah, rejected. Nobody, there was just no mercy. It was rejected, and I started thinking, wow, you know, I thought this was a fairly, you know, quality app. So I started looking back at it, and they were like, okay, we rejected it because of web clippings and things of that nature. But I learned an absolute, a ton of things, you know, from that experience. So since then, I've submitted apps in all the different stores, the Google Play Store, the App Store. I have a couple in the App Store that's Objective-C and one that's Swift. And have, you know, like I said, Google Play and the Windows Store as well, and Windows 8.1. So I learned a lot from that experience, and it's always sometimes good to be, you know, kind of humbled with that. Also set reminders. Set this short list of goals, you know, that you're looking to accomplish in the next year. You know, this list of goals can be kind of whatever you want. One of the things that I do is that I set up Gmail and reminders or Outlook or kind of whatever you would like. And after a couple of months, I pop it up and I reevaluate my things. I reevaluate myself. And I reevaluate myself based on a couple of things. You know, it could be everything from, am I happy with what I've currently been doing here at, you know, at Telerik? Am I happy with my learning? and when you start adding in, a lot of people start adding in jobs, and are you happy, that 3 months into your job? You need to constantly keep a check on this and this in your face, I believe, in order to keep moving forward. So again, with your job or your current job, and at the end of it, you can say the big, Yahoo. Also learning a different mobile platform. So I know that there's a lot of people here, that they know. I really doubt there's many people here that only knows just one language. So there's plenty that could be done here. So we've had to adapt, obviously, to a lot of changes in our industry very quickly, especially with the new things that have come out with wearables and IoT and things like that. If you didn't, you turned out to be this dinosaur, and I absolutely loved this show when I was a kid. And so again, this was kind of when I was first told, this was you really need to get into Objective-C and Java, and I understand I'm right here at the time. So my face was just like this, and there's my second shining reference of the day, and I was absolutely terrified with it. And I was like, hold up for a minute, I only have experience with these tool sets. And obviously, you've heard it many times. If the only tool you have is a hammer, you'll treat every problem with a nail. So I had a lot of C# based skills, and I was able to use those. But by kind of branching out, I found that it really helped. Also, it gave me, really broadened my perspective, and it gave me a deeper understanding of how computer and programming languages work. So just a few more slides here. We've got building self-confidence. I think every single one of us in this room is kind of stressed out to a point to where we're close to at least the anxiety part of things. And we probably all thought about hitting the road. I mean, I know I sure have in like almost every aspect of my life. I've thought about, what, I'm done with this. Forget this. It could be jobs. It could be relationships, it could be whatever. I'm just ready to hit the road. I'm out of this. But we always seem to do this. We kind of jump back in, and we adapt to it. And I started looking at how am I going to start dealing with these types of problems. And I found that if you start breaking it down, and I always said problems. And just a second ago I said problems. How am I dealing with problems? I started looking at those as turning those into this big opportunity, and that's just a big change of mindset that you'll need to have there. So know your strengths and weaknesses, and don't be afraid of it. So I've given talks as well with TJ over here on Angular JS, and TJ totally had to bail me out of some questions that people ask me on Angular, and it's been one of those things that I knew that I was weak in a certain area, but make sure you surround yourself with a bunch of really smart people, and obviously know your strengths where you can share those with others. And this is one is real hard for me, and it's accepting compliments and having the ability to compliment yourself. So freely accept those compliments that your boss gives you. Our first reaction is to say, no, I don't deserve that, or whatever. And also use criticism as a learning experience. So as I've said here, brace yourself. It is coming. It's going to be coming, and when it does come, you're going to be prepared to handle it. Staying current. So we have a couple of ways here. We've got Google, we've got Twitter, we've got blogs, we've got books. Well, actually, nobody can really use books anymore. Everybody uses kind of ebooks if they're going to do that sort of thing. But I found two that if you're really short on time, that you can cut this down to. High quality newsletters. So this is Mobile Web Weekly. This is one that I subscribe to. And if you want to know the guy that runs it, he's sitting right there. And so his name is Brian. And so he runs Mobile Web Weekly. And the only reason that I subscribe to his newsletter, and I subscribe to JavaScript Weekly, I subscribe to iOS Weekly, Android Weekly, and a couple of other things, is because I found that it has content like this. This was his issue on March the 4th, and it was hey, Firefox OS coming to US, developed markets. Here's 5 ONIC app development tips and tricks, And I found that, I didn't really have to go and look all over to understand more about the mobile web. I could just grab it from there. And there was also a couple of different link aggregators. This is just 2. There's many, many more, but I found that these cover not just the Microsoft space. Alvin covers a vast variety of just mobile in general. But there's just a couple of other ones. Uh-oh, I saw somebody taking a picture. Got it? Good. Finally, avoiding burnout. So taking a look back at myself, I found that there was a couple of things that hit me with that. Traveling too much was one of the biggies. And that's one of the things I've been trying to scale back on. And if you're working as a consultant and you're doing different types of projects, if you get to traveling, too much, and you've read these stories of people that just said, you know what, I was in a hotel room and I went ahead and called Delta or whoever, and I said, get me out of here. That's those times that you're going to be overwhelmed. And then obviously there's this work-life balance that absolutely does not exist. And don't let anybody push or make you believe that there's such thing as a work-life balance. There's no way you can really truly achieve a work-life balance. I believe the only things that you can kind of do with that is say, well, I'm going to try to spend a certain amount of time, with the family. I'm going to spend, the time with the work. And when work is creeping in to your daily routine with your family, you can cut it off. But there's no such thing, or I've found no such thing as being able to say, hey, here's my balance. Here's my balance at 5 o'clock. No emails, nothing related to my company. And I combat this with two things. Actually forcing myself to use vacation time, something that I really have been bad at doing. This year, I don't think I've taken a day off so far, but I'm planning on it for spring break or something. But use your vacation time. Just make sure that's something that you use. Don't give that time back to the company. It doesn't matter if you love them. I mean, I love where I work, but use your time. Another one is to absolutely disconnect. So I know there's nobody that actually probably uses a hard wire into their laptop anymore. This was the best graphic that I could find, but it's disconnecting. And we disconnected as a family one time, for the internet, and we were able to spend a lot of time doing some other very fun things. So here's the recap slide. I'm already over my time here. All of these slides are going to be available for you, but this is just a kind of quick rundown of some of the things that I've found in my life. And then also Telerik is able to let me come to these events and things, and so I just wanted to let you know of an event that we have that's coming up. It's called Telerik Next. It's going to be in Boston on May the 3rd through the 5th. If you're interested in it, you just go to teleriknext.com. And with that being said, you've been so kind to listen to me talk for all of this time, and 11:48 on this timer. And I would like to say thank you so much for staying and listening, to what I have to say. So if anybody has any questions, the next one doesn't start until when? 1 o'clock lunch. Well, cool. So I will be up here. If you want to go eat lunch, that's great. Otherwise, I'll just open the floor for any sort of questions that you may have. Or you can come up. Some people like to just come up. Thank you. Thank you.